Yeah, I mean, the value of the human is the creativity. I mean, when people think about DALL-E or when they think about ChatGPT or other AI, they forget that it's trained on the human's creativity. I think right now we have an opportunity as we are hitting these inflection points with these new technologies and so forth. How do we move away from a zero-sum game? And how do we start to think about problems from a place of abundance so that we can be even more creative, even more inclusive when we think about how to solve the complexities of the world and really leverage all humanity in the best way possible.
We're here with Jenny Larios Berlin. Jenny, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Drew. Thanks for having me. Should I tell you a little bit about myself?
Yeah, if you could, maybe take a minute to introduce yourself. Tell us how you came to be entrepreneur in residence at MIT Martin Trust School.
Yeah, I'm Jenny Larios Berlin, and I'm an entrepreneur in residence at the Martin Trust Center for MIT Entrepreneurship, as well as a lecturer of the practice of entrepreneurship at MIT Sloan. And the way that I got here, I guess, is a little circuitous. I was at MIT doing a double master's in urban planning and in business and graduated in 2015. And when I graduated in 2015, I guess I'm one of those MBAs that didn't graduate with a job already in mind. But I had two really great business ideas, and they actually ended up becoming their own startups. One was called Line Shift, which is in the creative art space, and it was bootstrapped. I became an advisor there. And the second startup that I co-founded, I was the CEO for, and that was a company called Optimus Ride. And so Optimus Ride did shared electric and autonomous mobility solutions in geofenced environments. We got it from nothing to over 200 employees before it was acquired by Magna International. That's a tier one OEM supplier and vehicle manufacturer. And as luck would have it, being an alum, I was invited to come and speak at a class called Mobility Ventures, which as a student was super, or as an alum was super jealous because it was a class that I would have loved to have taken. And it was only 2 years old when I came and spoke. But that class was taught by Bill Ouellette, who's the managing director of the center, as well as some individuals from the Department of Urban Studies and Planning. And so what was great is after I gave the lecture, Bill was like, oh my gosh, this is great stuff. Tell me more about it. And I was like, happy to. And in that process, we stayed in contact. And that must have been in November of 2021. And then the transaction happened in December of 2021. And I remember sending an email to Bill and others and saying, hey, just so you know, this email won't be active anymore. Please use my personal. And he immediately said, what's going on? Does that mean that you're available? Can you come back on campus? And I was like, why do you want me back on campus? And it's as luck would have it, we have an opportunity for you to come back to campus as an entrepreneur in residence. And for me, as a student, feeling the support, the encouragement, the love that I got while I was at MIT really helping me believe in myself as an entrepreneur, I was like, wow, I would love to come back and do that for students today. So that's why I'm here.
What a phenomenal story. And, as we talk about here on the lever, we're talking about the impact of machines, right? AI, robotics, automation, technology in general on the future of work. I'd love to just focus for a minute on Optimus Ride. In 2015, right, autonomous driving was it's one of the first innovations to bring the concept of AI to the mainstream, right? When we think about AI, the early days, autonomous driving. And John Markoff was one of the other contributors on the show too, talking about like machines of love and grace and a lot of autonomous driving. So I'm curious to get your thoughts, since you're early in co-founding a company in that space. What were your assumptions going into the creation of Optimus Ride and the ideation of it about AI and robotics? And how did those change on the way out?
Okay, interesting. So essentially thinking about how we thought about automation, how we thought about robotics coming into the company, and then how it evolved over time. I would say that fundamentally, there were things that we were consistent about. And some of the things that we were consistent about is that we believe having mobility as something that is accessible, that is affordable, and can be sustainable was of utmost importance. We believe that it continues to be of utmost importance, recognizing the impact that mobility has in greenhouse gas emissions and just overall impact on, really trying to create a world that is healthy for all of us. And so for us, we were constantly thinking about, how does automation unlock that potential? How can we make a service, by not having to have a driver in the vehicle, more affordable? How can we make it more accessible and sustainable from the perspective of having a lot of vehicles in the fleet that can be distributed throughout a neighborhood, where people can essentially hop on, hop off, and be able to live their lives more conveniently, eco-friendly, and ideally in an affordable way. And so for us, it's funny, because the first founders to come together for the company weren't the technical folks. It was about the urban design. It was about sort of the business opportunity and potential for autonomy and automation. And then the question became, what is the optimal tech solution as it pertains to the algorithms to use, as it pertains to the training data that we need, as it pertains to the hardware elements and the compute elements. But those elements were coming together to unlock the social and environmental value. And so for us, it was always about trying to implement that. Now, I will say that when we first started out, we thought, we should be able to do this all with cameras. We had folks on our technical team that had done a lot of research when they were PhD students, thinking about how you could have a full, robust, autonomous vehicle system with cameras. And what we realized is, over time, the technology is going to have to live and coexist with terrible human drivers. And if you want the technology to exist with terrible human drivers in an infrastructure that is designed for terrible human drivers, then you need to have multiple redundant safety systems. And as a result of needing those redundant safety systems, we decided that the technical stack needed not just cameras, it needed LiDARs, it needed different types of LiDARs in different positions. It also needed radar, it needed sonar, it needed GPS, so that you could have all of these different, say, work streams of data inputs that were all through complex sensor fusion coming together to validate, is that really a danger item, or is this something that our vehicle needs to respond to? And so I would say that in terms of how we saw the implementation of the technical stack, it changed over time. But the fundamental reason as to why we felt that this type of technology is necessary and critical in mobility, that always stayed consistent.
And isn't there some kind of phenomenon associated with, as humans, you're saying humans are terrible drivers, but when we look at something that's autonomous, we expect it to be 100% perfect all the time?
Yes. The relationship that humans have with robots and automation in terms of how they expect them to perform in relation to how humans expect other humans to perform is very unforgiving. And at the same time, we love to challenge the technology. We had a couple of instances where we would bring individuals to our test site and they would constantly say, hey, how will the robot respond if I just jump in front of the vehicle? And in my head, I would always ask myself, you're such an idiot. Why would you ever do that in front of a human driver? I'm just going to test the human driver and see how they respond with me jumping out in front. It's like, what makes you think that you don't do that with a human, but it's okay for you to test the robot in that condition? Yeah. And I think that there's something to be said about this idea of the robot is subservient to me, and I'm going to make sure that I'm constantly checking this hierarchy of importance, that I am the human, I am the one on top, and I'm making sure that everything and anything is both responsive and subservient to what I want and what I need. And so as a result, the burden comes on the technologist to build a technology that can be better. Now, to your point, individuals expect it to be at this 100%, even though human drivers are way off of that. And so this is part of the reason why really getting autonomous mobility to be fully adopted is going to take so much time, because you have to do the education, you have to normalize what safe is with this technology in and around humans, and then you have to normalize what it will be when there are less human drivers. And so I think some folks are trying to compare the technology and the deployment of the technology to the aircraft industry. And how did that industry evolve, and what types of parallels can we bring to it?
Sure.
Because nobody ever says, oh, that's another accident that happened in the air, let's go and analyze it, but it's okay, it's an accident, versus saying, no, that's a crash. We stop everything. We're pulling the black box and we're analyzing. And so I think we need to figure out where to place autonomous mobility, because it's in the infrastructure where people are okay with accidents, but it needs to function in the way that we want, that we treat the air traffic and the way that we treat that industry. And so it's somewhere in the middle, and we are very much in the bleeding edge of inventing that entire industry.
Yeah, absolutely. So taking that, like using the analogy of, commercial aircraft and flying, in your estimation, what was the time frame from we want to use this for commercial flying to when it actually happened? Was that years, decades?
Decades. There's been researchers at MIT that have been studying how do you take new technology, especially hardware technology, right?
Yeah.
That's interfacing with humans, and there's a potential for danger and all these kinds of things, for it to go from sort of an introduction to an adoption. And if I'm quoting the professor, it was this 30 to 50 year time frame. But the question is, when does the clock start ticking?
Yeah.
At what point? And unfortunately, it's one of those things where it's based on hindsight in terms of, okay, where was it? Was it, if you were to say for this industry, would you say that it's when GM invested in cruise automation? Was that when, the sort of the fire alarm went off in terms of, everybody looking at the industry? Is it when Google came out with their announcement that they had been studying and had deployed this technology on the streets of California? Is it something that we haven't seen yet in terms of, full deployment of the cruise vehicles in San Francisco? So that's the question is, as we see these big milestones in the industry that have happened thus far, what of those should we be counting that 30 to 50 timeframe in terms of policy and regulation and infrastructure all coming together to say we have a robust industry now?
Absolutely. And we saw that same thing, whether it's computing, the internet, right? There's all this, fear mongering right now about AI, right? And I think I was reading a report by the World Economic Forum, right? They estimate that 80 million jobs will be displaced over time by AI. On the flip side of that, they estimate over 90 million jobs, I'm going to guess over 100 million when all is said and done, actually being created because of this. When it comes to autonomous machines or AI, what major industrial sectors or job functions do you see being entirely replaced by that?
Right. So in terms of all of the different disruptions, let's say from the workplace that will happen as a result of autonomy, it's basically, how do you break down the value chain and then seeing, what of that particular piece in the value chain can be impacted by AI and automation, to then say, okay, how is it being done now and how can it be done in the future? And then what is the gap in skills so that person can essentially be upskilled to support that? So I'll give you an example. Call centers. When we were looking at the deployment of our mobility system in communities, what we were trying to ask ourselves is, what is going to be the new experience for somebody that's in the vehicle? You no longer have a referee that is played by the driver when you have different individuals in a vehicle, say Uber pool, right? Or say a bus. You no longer have that driver to make sure that everybody at some level is behaving cordially. And so now, what is the new model? And what do we need to communicate to the individuals in the vehicle, still saying civility is expected? And one of the things that we were thinking about is, what is going to be the new ratio of human to vehicle? And what does remote monitoring look like? And remote monitoring is not teleoperation. Remote monitoring is just that, which is, we're not getting involved with the vehicle. We're not getting involved with the end user unless and if there's an issue that arises. And how does somebody that's monitoring the vehicle keep track of the vitals of the vehicle? Say a flat tire hits. What do you do when a flat tire hits? You hear it, or you see the indicator. You have to get on the side, and then you have to figure out, do I have a replacement? Can I replace it? Do I have to call the state trooper because it's on a highway, or what have you? The same thing needs to happen, but now it's going to be done by somebody that's not in the vehicle. And at the same time that they're trying to do all of these other pieces to support the fixing of the vehicle, they now have to communicate with the individual in the car to say, we have a replacement vehicle for you that's on the way. And so now this is a whole call center type of thing, which is, okay, who do I call? Who do I send now to pick up this individual? And how do I let that individual know what the ETA is for the new vehicle to arrive so that they can hop in and go along their merry way? And so for us, what we were thinking is, okay, there's going to be this new model of vehicle management that is also going to require this customer service skill set. And the question now being, how do we prepare our existing drivers to go from safety driver to remote monitor and customer service agent? That's just one example, right? But think about another example in manufacturing, right? Where you have assisted robots, where perhaps now you don't need to go through the aisles to look for something. But what you as the human need to do is confirm that the items that are in the box are the best ones, right? Think about it as an example. Wouldn't it be great to have a robot that is doing the shopping for you instead of the human? So that then the human, all they're doing at that back end is confirming, is that mango ripe enough? Or is it overly ripe that maybe this is something that we use for a smoothie instead of in the cart? But then everything else you can automate. And so what that means is now you can make it more affordable, you can do more of it, and you can systematize some of these things. And so it's really about, how do you take that value chain and say, what is the different skill set that the human needs? How are we creating, from an economic development perspective, access to those training tools so that they can be ready to go when that change happens?
Yeah. Absolutely.
But yeah, and another example that's come up in terms of how the workplace is changing, right, is charging infrastructure. There is a whole gap of electricians that are needed to enable the real growth in electrical improvements and charging infrastructure and all these kinds of things. And so then the question becomes, how are we nurturing that pipeline? Do people really need to go to college? Can they go to trade schools and be their own entrepreneur and build businesses around these gap areas that are being created in these industries? Or solar panel installation, right? You don't need to be super educated, but if you have a carpentry background, you can have a full business on solar installation. So I think even from an automation perspective, the question becomes, how are we designing what the upskilling looks like, and how are we preparing that workforce? And then in the global South, I think, one of the articles that came out is how OpenAI was leveraging labor in different countries in Africa to help with image classification. For us, $2 is not that much money, but in other places in the world, that's huge. how do we manage that balance of not being exploitive, helping close a gap in education, increasing access to wealth, and at the same time, improving convenience and lifestyle because you're using these technology tools as unlocking additional value. So it's not so much a replacement as it is the world is changing. How do we make sure that we're changing with the world?
Yeah. And in that same vein, that I believe is actually what's opened the door and accelerated freelance and fractional work, because we're outsourcing more of the things that we don't view as strategically relevant to the vision of our companies, yet we still need that help. So we'll get into that in a second. I love your positive view here, right? There's so much opportunity. And we talked just before that about the fear mongering and the fear itself of displacement. I believe that this fear is rooted in the fact that we generally all agree that the employee-employer relationship is broken. And if we don't think it's broken, we think it could get better. But if I were to make that statement, the employee-employer relationship is broken, how do you respond to that statement and what do you attribute to your beliefs?
If we say that the employee-employer relationship is broken, and how I think about that and how I respond to that is that true worldwide? And are there examples where that's not true worldwide? Is the first react that I have. And then if we say we can at least speak from the US perspective, that there is this situation, quiet quitting or slow firing or whatever new term you want to call it. And I think it's fundamentally based on how we are as a country, which is we are capitalist in nature. And so if you are a capitalist, you're constantly thinking about the self-interest of something. And so that goes to our very core of our culture and how we think about things, because we frame things around this capitalistic mindset. And as a result, everybody is looking for each other's sort of personal gain and personal move. And I think that's the thing that's fundamentally flawed. And I think that's the thing that's being questioned. Is it still healthy to think about the world in a zero-sum game? Is it still healthy to think about things from this capitalistic perspective? And I think to a certain degree, we're seeing the cracks in the US system, because if everybody is looking out for their own selves, then there is no community to build. And that's where partisanship happens, because there's this ideology and it's, are you in that ideology or not? Because this is how I'll make sure that we get whatever it is we believe to be self-serving for us.
Yep.
And as a result, it does create this antagonistic relationship. You know, folks even, I think about how people think about people ops in an organization. And I think that there's a different, depending on where you stand in the organization, you have a different mental model of what people ops or HR is for you. You know, for some folks, they're like, oh, it's supposed to be my representative to help me grow within an organization. But fundamentally, people operations is to protect the company. And just even that disconnect of, oh, they're supposed to protect the company and not me. Why aren't they protecting me? And it's because there's this fundamental capitalistic perspective, which is that we are trying to figure out how to maximize growth of the organization. And that's what all elements are focused on. And so to the extent that we invest in you as an employee in service of that, then we're all on the same page. But if you think that we're investing in you from an altruistic perspective, there's a misunderstanding. And it sucks. It sucks to go to an organization and then come to that realization, because that is the model that we've created. I'm not necessarily saying that it's a good model or that I agree with it.
It is.
It's what I've observed in business is that this is what it is. And that's part of the reason that I think it's created this broken relationship.
Yeah. So on that same vein, corporate side, business side, looking at a worker, a human worker, an employee, what's the value of a human in the work context? How would you go about helping someone understand how to build a schematic?
The value of the human is the creativity. When people think about DALL-E or when they think about ChatGPT or other AI, they forget that it's trained on the human's creativity, and it's limited by the input data. And it's designed by the input data. It's informed by the input data. And so the thing that I worry about most in that space is that we give way too much credit to a shit in, shit out model. Like we don't know what's going into all those models. Maybe it's not shit. Maybe it's,
Yes.
really great stuff that's going into those models. But how do we know that? How do we judge that? And that's where the human comes in. It's the human that's able to put all of these different disparate pieces together to then judge what makes sense, to judge, does this flow, and to be creative. And I think that's where I get nervous in the US context, which is we don't put enough love and support to our educators. We don't invest enough in our students from an education perspective to really fall in love with learning and creativity and reading and inspiration, because it's that you're always going to need from the worker to help eliminate the redundant stuff, to help eliminate the boring stuff, like all the stuff that people do because they need a job. Those are the things that, like, how great would it be to get rid of those pieces? And then you as a human are doing the thing that you love to do at your job. Like, how great would that be?
What a
like
concept.
find something that you're passionate about. And the reason that you're doing that work is not because you need a job, is because you found something that unlocks your potential and they're paying you for it. Type of thing. And it's funny because I was walking in the mall one day, and there's this shop in the mall that it's like this mini kiosk that's selling macaroons. And there was an employee there who was just standing waiting to be asked to begin to sell some macaroons. And I could tell that guy did not want to be there. This is a punch in, punch out situation. And I'm like, how great would it be if we could have a robot or even just a kiosk that says, I want 5 chocolate macaroons and 6 coconut ones, and you have a robot arm that gives it to you in a vending machine and you're ready to go. And this person has the capability and the ability to go to community college, whatever it is, to land on that thing that this person's passionate about. And they could be doing that. Like, that's how I think about these opportunities. But we really have to help people want to learn and figure out what their potential value or what that thing inside that inspires them, so that they can go out and do that and be paid for it. And then in terms of how do you judge the value is settled by the market, right? If you charge a quote for an hourly rate and somebody says, what you have to provide me is worth that to me, then you have defined the value. It's based on what the market is willing to pay.
Absolutely. So you bring up this point, and obviously your vantage point, right? Being in higher ed and graduate programs, and also being the product of those programs. Really curious, and this can, as we wrap up here. So those types of programs, especially, those offered by the #1 technology school in the world, can warrant a hefty price tag. What I'm fascinated by in this construct, because we're talking about like the construct of education and work, for many, it's the last time that they rely on their own financing abilities for their career development. Because once you enter the working world, and you already talked about this a little bit before, it's viewed as a perk or a benefit, right? That I'm going to work here, and in turn, as a perk or benefit, they will develop my career. But they're only going to develop my career if it aligns with what they want to do. And so this can lead to, I call it like a pigeonholing of sorts of people in careers and career paths, because they're just essentially going down the road that they were given, not the road that maybe they're like, I'm destined to do this. I aspire to do this. I never had that opportunity to. You're not getting that programming, right? And so over the years, even MIT has made significant gains in offering free curriculum online to empower individuals to take control over their careers. So do you think we'll start to see more of a shift to direct to consumer in the work, career development, and education services?
In terms of direct-to-consumer educational and career development services, I think the short answer is yes. I get commercials on YouTube. I haven't bought the premium. Maybe I should get the premium. But one of the main things that they see, because they know I'm an educator, is they publicize master classes. That's a direct that's a complete direct to consumer model, right? We have gotten, playwrights, or we've gotten FBI negotiators, or, these top of the top people in their industries, and they're being paid a bunch of money to create these master classes that you can just buy into for $1,000. You'll leave with these tasks and these tools ready at your disposal so that you can do X. And I think that the ed tech market is super complicated. And I think that there is a lot of opportunity, especially as you were saying earlier too, where people are trying to own their own time back. And as a result, they're moving to these contractor, or they're moving towards these gig work sort of style. What I worry about the workers there is thinking that, oh, I'm an entrepreneur now, and I'm running my own business. Is no, you are a gig worker and somebody has contracted you because they don't want to pay your benefits. Understand what the trade-offs are here. But since you do have your time, how are you leveraging that time to get you to that next level? And that next level could be, you want to be an entrepreneur and you want to figure out what is the thing or the product or the service that you want to create so that you can build maybe a small business enterprise or an innovation-driven enterprise. But how are you using that disposable time, or not disposable time, but how are you using that extra time that you have to prepare you for that? If you're not using it for that, then that's what I worry about, is people not being strategic about their time and then losing out on those opportunities and then scrambling to catch up. One of the things that I was talking to somebody about was student loans. And, a lot of students, through the delay in the charges of interest, just stopped paying, right? Like they couldn't afford to pay for their loans. And so they stopped paying their loans. And now they're scrambling because when these payments come back online, and they will come back online, they'll have to figure out now, how do they budget for all of that, given that they didn't budget appropriately in the past to try to pay while there wasn't an interest payment. And so that is the same type of concern that I have, which is if you're not being strategic with your money, or you're not being strategic with your time, when you have an opportunity to do, you're going to be scrambling in the back end. And so how do we help people understand that's a gap, and that they should be as smart or as efficient with their time to help prepare them for that next thing?
Yeah, your career is the greatest asset you own. So
and you're spending most of your time doing it. So you better love it.
Absolutely. Hey, I know we're way over time. This has been awesome. I did have one more question, but if you need to go. Okay.
No, I told them that we could start at 1:15.
So okay, awesome. Thank you so much, Jenny. Okay.
Yeah, no worries.
You have an amazing vantage point, right? Helping some of the most intelligent and technologically gifted individuals in the world innovate new products, ideas, and companies. What are some of the most popular problem spaces that folks are tackling now?
Some of the most popular problem spaces that our students are tackling, I would say, is in the climate tech and in the healthcare space. And one of the things that we've been talking a lot about in the Entrepreneurship Center is entrepreneurship is a mindset, and it's a problem-solving oriented mindset. And it's one that is useful and applicable in anything you do and in any direction that you go, whether it's government, nonprofit, corporate, or the startup space. And how are we helping individuals, where they're thinking from a problem perspective, take those big, hairy problems and figure out how to solve them in a way that makes the world a better place? So it's merging that talent pool with this entrepreneurial mindset to go solve big problems that can really help people. And I think right now that focus ends up landing in those two problem spaces, right? How do we help people be healthier so that we can be our best selves? And how do we think about climate change so that we can address the existential crisis of our time? And how are we using these tools, generative AI or AI in general, neural networks, machine learning, robotics, hardware, chips, manufacturing, all of these different things? How are we thinking about it from the perspective of improving such that We are addressing the existential crisis of our lifetimes, which is climate change, so that we can be our best selves and actualize ourselves as individuals in the healthiest way possible.
Yeah, it really comes down to what we've been talking about, right? As humans, right, we yearn to find work that aligns with our values and to be with those who share them. And that transcends any construct, right?
That's exactly right.
Have you done any, or has there been any work done, or are you familiar with it? Have you done any work looking into the impact of Web3 on business?
There is work looking at the impact of Web3 on business. I haven't directly been looking at that, but I will say that it was really neat to talk to another alum who shared with me their diploma that's on the blockchain as a way of saying this is a validated diploma, and you can use that when you are checking me out in terms of me as a potential employee somewhere, me as a potential advisor somewhere. This is almost like my blockchain validated resume type of thing. And I thought that was really an interesting concept, right? Because we still have stories about how people plagiarize elements of their resume.
Right.
It's still a gap. And there's only so much as a recruiter or as a startup trying to hire really great people really quickly that you can check on. And to think about how we can use these tools to, again, be more efficient so that we can focus on the things that we care about the most, I think that's really interesting.
Wow, that's a fantastic thought. One that aligns very much with what we are moving towards here on The Lever. Jenny, it's been an absolute pleasure to chat with you today. Is there something I didn't ask or that we didn't chat about that you'd like to talk about? Something
that I think is always exciting to chat about is how do we change our mental models so that we can think from a place of abundance? I think right now we have an opportunity as we are hitting these inflection points with these new technologies and so forth. How do we move away from a zero-sum game? And how do we start to think about problems from a place of abundance so that we can be even more creative, even more inclusive when we think about how to solve the complexities of the world and really leverage all humanity in the best way possible? Yeah, there's a lot there about fixed mindset, growth mindset. Exactly. And what's funny about that, you're not usually fixed with one of those. You oscillate between, right? You ebb and flow. And we're definitely entering an era where I think more growth mindset and that view of abundance is going to make all the world. Exactly. And, just a general invitation to folks, if you want to learn more about entrepreneurship or what's going on at MIT around this space, come and visit us at the Trust Center. We are open to one and all. That's awesome. Jenny, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you. Take care.